So this is my adopted mom, and this is number 3 out of 4. Greetings and well wishes. My name is Patty Dowdy, and I am Morgan's mother by request and Evie's appointed godmother. We have a very different name for it in our community, but for simplicity we will use godparent as the responsibility remains the same. I often took Morgan into my home as a teen when she was kicked out of her mother's house for whatever reason, from undone dishes to being unable to balance homework and babysitting, causing her to slack off or struggle. To my understanding, this is the same reason that Morgan's younger sister had left Jennifer's herself as a teen. There was no balance in the home and no chances for healthy mistakes or weaknesses. This, throwing her out of the house for the night to smarten up in Peterborough, happened on more than one occasion, but it was the pregnancy that caused us to really step in. The first time that she stayed with us longer than an overnight was when she was 17 and just showing her baby in her belly. Jen threw her out for not being able to babysit and finish schoolwork, and they felt that she was being rude. Before moving in with us, Morgan had trouble even expressing basic needs and wants like hunger, thirst, or needing a hug, and my husband and I had to convince her to tell us when things were upsetting her or we wouldn't even know about them. Jennifer is, as far as I can tell, a purely abusive person who thrives off of hurting her kids in secret. She has no reason for most of her actions, no matter what kind of excuse is given. Rational end goals for a person simply aren't a part of her focus. Shame and regret are. When I went to speak with her, Jennifer, about my concerns with Evie's mental health and her breakdowns after her visits, Jennifer shut Morgan down and refused to speak about difficult topics that she needed guidance with for parenting. Denial was her default when responding to past issues that she had caused, and she is very emotionally, verbally, and mentally abusive towards Morgan and her siblings for what I can tell is the pleasure of it. She would lock the kids up in their rooms, which left Morgan feeling unable to process a lot of issues as a kid. And if the children did something wrong, Jennifer belittled them so badly that on one occasion Morgan became suicidal after having a stay at her mother's and spoke only about feeling broken and feeling hopeless. After staying with us for a week, she was showing drastic improvements and had herself back into the flow of working on her online schooling again. Something that she had dropped out of due to her depression, caused, in my opinion, by her mother's lack of affection and safe touch. I also remember a time that we had to help Morgan in involving the police for a federal crime. Jen had convinced Morgan's younger sister to help her in opening Morgan's school mail about debts from OSAP. Jen flipped out on Morgan for supposedly not paying for her student loans from several months prior, which had already been paid for by the time the letter arrived at her mother's, where she was renting. This threw us for a loop and added even more strain onto her relationships, as Morgan couldn't trust when it was safe to open messages from her family or get calls. Not to mention that she didn't feel safe to go visit them or live with them. For rent, never for free after age 16, which was another grossly unfair rule in my opinion, since Morgan didn't have a job at the time and was still in high school. Opening someone else's mail is definitely against the law, and an officer did attend, but he simply told Morgan that she should try listening to her mother about her needing to be responsible with her life. Jennifer got away with this abuse, just like everything else, and continued to shame Morgan with it. I remember that each time, at least 4 or 5 times, when I took Morgan to my home, that she would constantly apologize for every little thing that she did and rush to fix mistakes that she thought she'd made, even if she wasn't in trouble for silly things. She would cower and wouldn't look up if she did something that she thought was rude or unthoughtful in my home, and she wasn't allowed to think in her mother's home. To me and my other parent and grandparent friends, these were tiny things that I would happily let my own son do. Once in a blue moon, she might not immediately remember to clear up after supper or to offer to take our plates to the sink, and she would rush to fix the problem, or if she was laughing too loudly or staring too much or talked too often or too fast. She also suffered from nightmares which she couldn't remember upon waking, and only ended up being discovered because she cried silently and I saw her shaking on the couch one night when I woke up and went to go check on her. I would have to help her calm down gently and tell her that she did nothing wrong. Sometimes it took me time to get her to understand that fact, and I still wonder if she doesn't feel like she's about to be punished constantly. She was still processing, and nobody in that home gave her the time to do so. I've met Jennifer a few times, and she has even tried to manipulate me and degrade my own parenting, while discussing her own parenting methods. We were discussing Evie's meltdowns and her needs at a family meeting we set up, she and I. prior to the CFS, or the Child Family Services, stepping in. I had a very difficult time as my child had oppositional defiance disorder and attention deficit disorder, much like Evie, who needed supports, not pain. I have watched Morgan raise her daughter over the years, and she is one of the best moms that I know. I'm going to skip the next bit because she's basically just being nice. But I think it's important to mention this part. She protects little things, and it's obvious why from her traumatic youth. She has worked so hard to be an amazing mom for her baby and not to be abusive and narcissistic to her in her responses like her mother still is. To put Evie in the care of Jennifer would be a huge mistake for even short day visits. I have no doubts that Jennifer would ruin Evie's momentum with personal growth if she were to do something wrong, with a punishment rather than a correction that wouldn't fit Evie's actions. Everything I saw from Morgan's tug-of-war relationship with her mother, or with her mom's good and bad sides, was hurting Morgan and her ability to trust. Jennifer, I think, is still trying to find ways to control Morgan in her adult life, and unfortunately now that is through Evie. This outreach to the courts isn't about keeping contact or bringing up safety concerns. DBCFS have none, and that's Nagdawan Magbanujiog Child Family Services. They write her letters to talk about how well she does, not how much she needs to do. They need to help her with Evie's mental health because that is the correct agency for long-term care sometimes. They aren't the CAS and they don't work towards removal, but instead program management. They had to step in because some neighbors Morgan had at her new house, who had a very public history, see the Examiner in this week papers, of abusing the town with drugs and until they were removed, Morgan lived underneath them. They tried to kill Morgan a couple times they did, and threatened her family, killing her pets and throwing rocks through her windows. Both of those last things they admitted to doing proudly. All because she's Native and they didn't know at first because she passes for white like the rest of her family. Morgan is trying to give her daughter the tools and experiences that she needs to grow into a good and sturdy person. She won't find that with Jen. There are so many reasons that Morgan has kept her daughter from Jennifer, and the main one being she doesn't want her daughter subjected to the emotional, verbal, mental, and physical suffering and neglect which she overcame while growing up. In my opinion, it is in the best interest of Morgan and her family to not have any contact with her grandmother, Jennifer. Morgan has come a long way and has been doing so amazingly without her mother in her life, and it would be best for her to continue doing so as she's growing into an amazing woman. Thank you for your time, Patty Dowdy. Thank you, Patty.